I wasn't thinking that the 6 was us. I guess it is.
Maybe they're just arriving fashionably late.
Like my style is usually starting to turn my computer on when the meeting's supposed to start.
Yeah.
We're just giving it a few more minutes to see if other people have a chance to sign on. All right, I think we should just go ahead and get started and everybody can join as they have a chance. So welcome to the webinar, Academic Promotion Demystified Part 2, presented by the Women in Academic Medicine Committee for ACEPS. We had another webinar about a little over a year ago, and that focused on various pathways or tracks to promotion. That webinar is available on the ACEPS website. For your reference. This session will also be recorded and will also be placed on the website, so you can refer back to it in the future if necessary. So in this webinar, we're going to focus on preparing for promotion. We will be discussing what you should be thinking about and preparing for promotion starting day one. We will also be talking about how to chart your path to success in this promotion process. We have a great group of panelists who represent a number of experiences in academic medicine. I'm going to let each one of them introduce themselves, and I'll start with Nupur.
Hi, I'm Nupur Gangpadai. I'm a pediatric plastic surgeon and microsurgeon in Chicago at Lurie Children's Hospital. I'm an associate professor in the Northwestern Plastic Surgery Residency assistant program director. And I went through the promotion process in 2021 and then got promoted in 2022. So it's fairly fresh in my mind.
Okay, Abigail.
Hey, Abby Chapman, Plastics at Tulane. I am currently a full professor, went through the promotion 2021 and 22, but was promoted in 2023. So that's also fairly fresh in my mind. I'm the program director of our residency here.
Inez?
Hi, Inez Lynn. I am an associate professor at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. I am a hand surgeon, primarily doing adult hand surgery, lots of trauma. And I went through the promotion process 2 years ago. So also a relatively fresh experience. I can also comment a little bit about extensions and things like that.
Thank you. And Kristen?
I'm Kristen Rizak. I'm an associate professor of surgery at Duke University Medical Center. I've been there about 5 years, and I'm probably one of the most newly promoted to associate this past year. I've been in academia for 10 years, so I can talk a little bit about that as well. And I'm also associate program director and director of Duke Raleigh Plastic Surgery. And I do a lot of breast recon, cosmetics, transgender, and basically all the above.
Okay, thank you. And I'm Nicole Summer. I am professor at SIU School of Medicine. I am program director as well. I do mostly breast and cosmetic surgery. So for any of the potential residents who might be on this learning about promotion, we wanted to first bring up the topic of learning about your job in the future and learning about promotion before you have even accepted a job. So it's going to be important for you to ask questions while you're looking for that job to find out what the promotion process is, how promotion works, what is expected, because that may make a difference on which job you actually choose. So my first question was for Kristen. What was your experience moving to Duke from your previous institution in regards to how those expectations for promotion were different?
So each institution has their own standards for promotion. And so some are more stricter than others. Some go based off of just timeline. Albany Med, where I was before, tended to go based a little bit more on timeline than, as well as academia, so research, leadership, and everything else. But it was on a different level than where Duke was. So I was all set to go for associate while I was still at Albany Med. But when I transferred over to Duke, their process was a little bit more stringent, or a lot more stringent. So I went into a different path. Basically, I was still under the clinical promotion, so clinical tenure, non-tenured path, and so it's like a tracked 4 through different tracks for each promotion. And so then it set me up to go back into an assistant professor, working my way up to an associate. So I was not transferred in as an associate. Sometimes if you start as, like, if you get associate at the institution where you're at, you may try to lobby and get over as an associate to transfer into it. So it's a little bit easier. But I did not go through the promotion process in Albany.
Is there anything you would have liked to have known making that transition ahead of time that would have been helpful?
I think part of the process, yes, it would have been nice to know what Duke's promotion standards were, what they required, and their guidelines. So it would have been a little bit easier for me. But I don't think things would have changed any. I would not have stayed just to get promoted. My other things of why I left, or why I joined Duke, just went on with that. So.
Okay. So your education of the promotion process really starts when you accept that position. And this is, when you need to find out from your institution, how do you find out about what you need for your promotion? That may be finding that out from your chairman. That may be finding it out from someone in surgery, in the Department of Surgery, who is that's one of their jobs, is to help people figure out how they get promoted. It may be for the chairman of the P&T committee who helps you figure that out. But the most important thing is really getting that information. If it's in a handbook, if it's on the website, if it's a paper folder they give you, whatever that is, knowing that from the very beginning so that you can start preparing as soon as you get there. So the first topic we want to look at is the timeline of promotion, because that's a really important thing for you to know first off as soon as you start your position. So Nupur, can you discuss in general how the timeline of promotion works?
Absolutely. So I think it is going to have a little nuance depending on what program you're at, but a general timeline is that for most institutions, you need to be there a minimum of 4 to 5 years before you can be considered for like the first stage of promotion. Some institutions that range can be 5 to 10 years. And then before you consider sort of from assistant to associate and then associate to full professor, again, another 5 to 7 years, though that range could be up to 10 years. For most of us in plastic surgery, we come in at an assistant professor level. Depending on your institution, they may start you as a clinical instructor for a year and then transition you to an assistant professor level after you've sort of passed the first year of being a plastic surgeon. And so that sort of sets you back a little bit in that timeline. So that timeline of 5 to 7 years usually starts once you become an assistant professor. In terms of the general process, for most places, it's not a fast process. So if you want to apply to be an associate professor in year 2024, you're probably have already put your application together and it's probably ready to go either at the end of 2022 or the beginning of 2023. So that preparatory cycle can be about 12 to 18 months, depending on the institution. But I think that's why it's really important to look at your promotion and tenure website and either meet with a representative from the P&T committee in advance or your division chair or chief to determine when you would go into that cycle, because it requires a lot of work in advance, which I certainly didn't realize when I was going through it the first time.
Do any of the other panelists have a different experience with the timeline at your institution?
Our timelines varied a little bit based on what track you're at. So some tracks are very specific about how much time you have to get promoted, and other tracks, there's a little bit more flexibility and maybe even no pressure to get promoted at all. So then it's kind of more driven probably by, the individual and maybe their mentors and leaders. And then I think, and so when you have that specific timeline that you have to get promoted by, then obviously it sometimes changes your calculus a little bit in terms of when you're going to prepare and how much work you have to do. And I guess it also sometimes I think that the timeline to do something or to plan varies a lot depending on kind of what your expectations are for that.
Thank you. Abby, how do you know if you are on track for promotion?
I think having regular meetings with your leadership, whether it's either your division chief or your chair, and having those conversations regularly to be prepared for make your expectations are matching your department's expectations. And then like we've said before, looking at what those criteria are on the website or on the handbook, and sort of making your own 5-year plan. And our institution is also essentially 5 years minimum for promotion. And, reviewing your timeline with your leadership was helpful for me.
So I know that sometimes the timeline has to have an extension. Inez, can you speak on that?
Yeah, so the track that I'm on at Penn, we have 10 years to get promoted. But they do allow for some extensions depending on personal or professional situations. So I think a common one for women is having children. Or adopting, etc. And also I think nowadays probably for different parenting situations. And so we were encouraged anytime you were expecting to add a person to your family, we were encouraged to apply for an extension. It was pretty much always guaranteed. It gives you 1 extra year onto your clock. The important thing I think to remember, or that they always instructed us, was that this 1 year is not something that you absolutely have to take. It just adds an extra year. And if your portfolio is basically ready and everyone feels that you're ready for promotion without the extra year, it doesn't matter. You can still go up for promotion, but it just gives you a little bit of buffer, and you have to apply for it within the year of that happening. So you kind of just want to get it in. And it's for us, it was a pretty simple form to fill out. So I did that for both of my children. I also did it for COVID. I think most universities offered a COVID extension for a promotion. And you can also do it if you have a death or serious illness in the family that affects, that requires a lot of your attention. Any kind of professional catastrophe, they always cite like you have a basic science lab and like all your mice die, then you can apply for an extension in that way as well.
Great, that's really helpful. Thank you. So our next topic is going to be collection of all the necessary information. I think this is the part that can really get to people, especially if they don't start right away, they can realize how important this was after the fact. Those areas of collection are in scholarship, education, and service. What I'd like to discuss first is just recommendations on the best way to collect this information. So, Kristen, can you comment on your experience in collecting all of this necessary data points for your promotion?
Yes. So when a couple things, when I didn't realize what to do when I first started, but Duke has a great program for orientation for most academic doctors. And so at the orientation, they give out a lot of information. So one of them is basically a sheet that lists pretty much everything that we should be doing, as well as they actually give you folders and files. And you can see here all the topics at the top, and I can read them off just so you can see it. And so we get this packet, and I promptly just stored it away and ignored it for 5 years. So I wish I was paying a little more attention. So some of their folders headlines are, and it's similar to what Nicole had said, it's administration, annual review assessment, awards, recognitions, kudos, continuing education activities, correspondence networking, mentor, advisor activities, teaching, long-term goals, privileges and credentials. And then they also state presentations, publications, and scholarly activities. And a lot of that's also on a CV that you're going to be updating as well too. So what I do recommend, and I should have done this initially, was have these folders, and anytime you get any of these information is to put it into the folder. And then I also recommend making folders on your computer and with the same files. And so either it's digital or paper, and that way you have both to organize your system. And I do recommend that you're the one doing it, and every couple months is when you update your CV would be to make sure that you have this updated as well. One thing that I didn't know, that they were very particular about actually dates, like specifics, instead of just 2020 or 2021, they wanted July 14th, 2020, so they wanted actual dates where you have those. And so the other thing would be to make sure you have lists of actual names of who your mentors, the mentees are, and to keep track of that too. And I think that would have helped a little bit, during the application process and for the promotion.
Abby, can you share your experience and recommendations on who should be compiling or collecting all this information?
Yeah, so mine was a little bit of a roadblock in that our department had a designated admin support that was in charge of physician credentialing and also helping to gather these packets. And part of this was, I think, COVID and staffing changes, but that position during my gathering period had changed hands with 3 different staff members. And unfortunately, despite thinking I was on top of it, there was a number of delays or paperwork that was not submitted correctly that created probably at least a 6-month delay, close to a year in my packet. We also had a change in plastic surgery divisional program coordinator and admin help, which also created a layer of complexity. So I can't agree more with keeping a very organized system for yourself with timelines and calendar invites and reminders to check on this and make sure these things are moving forward, because it was very complex with a lot of moving parts, and that delayed things for me 6 months.
Inez and Newport, do you guys have anything to add to that?
I think what's nice for a lot of institutions is they do have an electronic CV essentially that they want you to use. And for us at Northwestern, you actually do kind of an update of your CV in December, and then you review it with your division chief or your chair at the end of December. So you sort of have a year-end in review of all of your accomplishments, and it covers these domains. So it covers service, it covers education, mentorship, scholarship with reference to publications, presentations, posters, and book chapters, and then kind of like areas of growth. And you sort of pick 2 or 3 that you can highlight each year amongst those categories. And what's nice is then all of that information gets imported into the CV format that your institution wants for when you go up to promotion. And so they didn't do this my first 2 years of being at Northwestern, but starting in 2019, it was an annual requirement. And so that actually made the process much easier, because I knew that I was going to get those 3 or 4 reminder emails in December that I needed to do that by the end of the year, and then have a sit down. So it allows you to be quite granular about what you've done over the past year. And then it's usable because it's already in that electronic format. Prior to that point, I had just been keeping a Word document CV, and I actually switched the format of my CV to reflect what was required for promotion, because then you're not double documenting different things. And so I think just picking one system, hopefully in line with your promotion and tenure system, is actually going to be the most efficient. And I wish I had done that on day one.
Inez, do you have anything else to add to that?
We also have an electronic record keeping system at Penn, and it definitely makes it a lot easier. I agree, it's very important to do it regularly. So I try to, like, when I'm coming back from a meeting, if I've given a talk, is just go ahead and just try to get it all into that program immediately, so that it's there and I don't have to, go back and do it, and I know the dates already.
Thanks. Yeah, I think that no one is as invested in your promotion as you are. So I think you really have to take charge of making sure that this data is all being collected. And obviously, a lot of the universities have ways to make that a little bit easier for you. So that's great. So I want to spend a few minutes on each of the areas that they look for with promotion. And the first one is scholarship, which means traditional peer-reviewed publications, grant funding, but it also can include book chapters, participation in national guideline production, patient safety, QI projects. And it could be the scholarship requirements could be very different depending on the different track that you're on. So those are things that obviously you would find in your promotion packet. You need to know what the metrics are for your institution and for your track. So Inez, can you review the various activities that fall under scholarship for your track?
Yeah, so the track that I'm at on Penn is the clinician educator track. It's basically kind of lumps a little bit with the tenure track, because it has some of the faculty benefits that people kind of think about when you're tenured. But it's not quite as research rigorous as the tenure track. So for those on the tenure track at Penn, it's very important to have outside funding. Very important, people look at that, high impact first author, senior author papers. The clinician educator track recognizes that people are still primarily clinicians, but have strong research interests. So a lot of clinician educators still have outside grant funding. I don't have a lot of it. I do a lot more just kind of clinical retrospective reviews and education research, but that's what makes the CE track at Penn kind of interesting, is that it's a very broad track. There are some people with, who are 75% research with a lot of outside funding, and a lot of their time is dedicated to research. And then there are people on the same track who are very heavy clinical and still publish. And so that's where it's very important, I think, to keep in touch with people who have gone through the process, who are familiar with the promotion, to kind of figure out where you fit and if you're ready to go up for promotion. But that being said, I think you have to recognize what your track requires, what people have gotten promoted on before, and then make sure that you do that. And so CE track is the scholarship is more just any kind of research. So, collaborating with others. So there's recognition that middle authorship is still of value. So those papers still count towards kind of your promotion, but you should obviously still have senior author and first author papers to demonstrate your expertise. A lot of it's the focus is on a reputation. So being regionally and nationally known for, your, specialty and subspecialty. Book chapters and book editors are all kind of within kind of that overall concept of writing and publishing. So I think people consider book chapters as similar to, peer review publications.
Do any of the other panelists have a different experience being on a different track or at a different institution? As far as what's considered scholarly activity? No.
We're similar at Duke with the clinical, the tenured and the non-tenured, and they have a very, the clinical non-tenured is a little bit more flexible path, just like Anna said. But I think the most important thing is that you don't have to be, and which was a misconception for me, and I didn't know this as a resident, that I thought, from a promotion standpoint, you needed to get grants, and be, 50, first author research publications in order to get promoted. That's not necessary. And so even just as a clinical, I'm mostly clinical and don't do a lot of research. I don't have grant funding, but I do other things with leadership and, in societies. And those are other things that count that I didn't know. I think it's important for upcoming residents and young faculty to know that you don't have to be just, a lab person and just, get articles that way. So.
Yeah, Nicole, I would agree. I also don't have lab funding, but do a fair amount of clinical research, and things that counted as effective mentoring of medical and graduate students towards scholarship in medicine, participation in editorial boards or national scientific committees, things like poster and oral presentations at meetings, being an invited speaker to meetings, in addition to all the authorship of articles and papers. And so what was really helpful to me is to keep running notes of every time I had one of these, keep this in the forefront of my mind and keep running notes whenever I did one of these things, and try to really keep organized and enter it so that once a month or whatever, when you update your CV, you have all of that where you don't forget to enter it.
Great, thank you. So the next area is education, and a lot of the teaching experiences that participants are going to have is going to be on a local level at first. You're going to be teaching your local medical students, your local residents, but as you go up the academic ladder, the expectations are going to change. You're going to be expected to have your education abilities go beyond that local level and go to the regional, national, or even international level. And that would, obviously things like developing learning modules, giving courses, participating in panels, being invited as a visiting professor, participating in national organizations on teaching. I mean, all of those things are going to potentially be something considered in your education part of your portfolio. Abby, can you elaborate on activities that fall under that in your track?
Absolutely. So our track calls it teaching, not education. But the things that count for full professor promotion is preparation and presentation of material in a well-organized, current, and provocative fashion as evaluated by senior faculty of the School of Medicine. Evidence of continuous positive evaluations by students and residents. Success of clinical training programs that show that you are a national and international expert in terms of education. Developing new curricula, as the program director, developing new courses or new teaching methods, leading a national scientific course, track record of effective mentoring and training of other faculty in educational topics, being an academic role model and mentor for medical students, development of leadership and educational workshops at the national or international level, and then receipt of teaching honors, awards, and prizes at the institutional, regional, or national levels. So it really was very broad scope. I think from my standpoint, the efforts that I had with our residents and students, especially as program director, were really focused by me in my executive summary for promotion.
Great. Kristen, are there any other activities that as a young faculty, someone may not be aware of that fall under education that they need to keep track of?
Yeah, I agree with that. Abby is the same thing. Like we had the all the basics when you do with the teaching, specifically what she's already listed. And I think majority, so like even teaching medical students and doing you teach in medical school class, and that counts. But also things that we don't think about. I do set up a micro lab training for the residents and the students. And so we do courses on the nights and weekends. We set that up. That's counted. So you got to make sure you keep track of every training session that you do with them. And that's part of this teaching education. And also we do an injectable cosmetic clinic resident sessions. And so those are quarterly, as well as sometimes during the didactics. So that also counts. So you need to keep track of the dates and who you've trained during those sessions as well. That's all teaching and education. So those are things that you may not think about outside of the traditional grand rounds didactic lectures that we give as well. But those other teaching opportunities are included and should be counted on your summaries or your statements.
Thank you. So let's move to service. Every institution defines this differently. There's going to be a certain baseline expectation for everyone, but you'll need to find out, from your own institution, what is going to fall under that line of service. A lot of times it's participation in hospital and medical school community committees. It's participation in national organization, public service, DEI activities. As you progress through the ranks, there's going to be some expectation that you will have greater leadership involvement. So it won't be just being on a committee, it'll be that you're the chair of that committee. Those are things that are going to be expected as you move up in the ranks. So Nupur, how have you been strategic with your service activities?
I think that's a great point. So broadly speaking, you're right. It is defined differently based on the institution. So my institution specifically wants you at a kind of associate professor level to develop a regional or national presence in a clinical area that kind of elevates the name of the institution. And then when you are transitioning from associate to full professor, to really elevate yourself in a national or international way. And they define that not just from the number of presentations you're giving, but from a hospital committee basis, that you are on so many hospital committees, and eventually, again, with that sort of same timeline of 5 to 7 years, that you step into a leadership role for one of those hospital committees or one of the healthcare system committees, whether that's at the medical school level or at the health organization level. And then on a national level, certainly looking at that service that's in line. And so for me, my two passions are really education as well as leadership. And so fortunately, through our national organization, I've been able to combine both of those. And so as I have sort of gone through several iterations of leadership through ASPS, through ACEPS, through ASMS, I've always tried to lean into what is elevating women into positions of leadership. And so I've kind of streamlined a lot of my responsibilities to that. When I was a junior faculty member, which I think is a mistake we all make, is you say yes to everything because you're worried that you're not going to be asked again. And then by the time you sort of get into the mid-career point, you have to start paring that down to things that you're really passionate about and can devote your time to. And so now I don't say yes if I don't actually have the time to devote to it. And if I say yes to one opportunity, then, and I feel like I do that regularly, I will jettison something else. So I'll say, well, I've been on this committee now for 3 or 4 years, or I've achieved sort of the chair level position of X committee. It's time to pass that on to somebody else so that I can concentrate on something else. So in general, I try to keep my hand in 5 or 6 things that I think I can do well at any given time. And above that, I don't have the bandwidth to do it. And so that's, I think, how I've been strategic about it.
Kristen, I'm really curious, since you've been at 2 different institutions, how service was seen differently, or maybe there was no difference between the 2 institutions.
A good question. It was pretty similar, and just as Nupur described, they're very similar in what they describe for service, with being involved with the hospital as well as your societies. I think a good thing that people don't realize is that there's things that you can do in your institution that may not give you a title, but actually qualify. Just for example, at Duke, I was hired basically to help build out Duke Raleigh plastic surgery. So we took whatever we were at the main campus, and I instituted at a small community hospital and built pretty much what we did at the main campus with free flaps and everything, and open clinics with the OR. So all that was, included, originally got a directorship, right? So that's a director of Duke Raleigh Plastic Surgery. However, I also started, and what wasn't a title or anything, was that I was the first one to do, gender affirming surgery with plastic surgery at Duke. And so to build that program, I didn't have a title, like I wasn't the director of anything. I worked with colleagues across Duke, collaborating to improve the diversity. We taught lectures on language and terminology and transgender care, and we gave lectures, and I can't tell you how many grand rounds, and worked with nursing and PACU, all these things to teach, as well as to build a center, which we've been working on for 4 years, doing a 100-page proposal. And there's a team of 6 of us, correlating, trying to build or collaborating with the Duke Global Health Institute, doing the research component. And that just, even though there's no title for it that I could put down, that's included. That's included in service. And we don't think about things like that, but that's what you have to describe. And what we have is a summary statement, or your development statement, that I think we'll probably talk about a little bit, but that's also important to consider.
Just want to give the other panelists a chance to speak on that, if you have anything else to add to that. Okay, good. So you will likely run into roadblocks during this process, and it's helpful to know about these ahead of time, so that you can either avoid them, or at least you can know how to minimize them. So Abby, what were some roadblocks that you ran into in the process, and how did you overcome them?
Yeah, I think the main one I had briefly mentioned was just the organizational structure we had with the admin support for compiling the packet. A lot of this was outside my hands, where I picked my letter writers, but then I was relying on the admin to reach out. And like I said, that was one of the delays, and that position changed hands several times. So that was the main roadblock I had. And the delay in actually getting some of the letters of recommendation back held it up another few months. And so we were allowed to suggest 10 letter writers. We need 5 for the promotion, all being full professors. And so, getting those out really soon, I think would be very helpful in the future.
I think that segues into, I'll skip to the letter of recommendation component of the panel, just so we can talk about that a little bit, because you did mention the letter of recommendation. So most of the universities will have you give them a list of potential letter writers. That doesn't mean they'll reach out to all of those. And I think every university does it differently, as we've discussed this as a panel in the past. And as what is important preparing for these letters of recommendation? What kind of advice could you give for that?
Yes, I think, every institution probably is going to be a little bit different from the next, but I think they all share some concepts that these are going to be letters from people, probably most likely other plastic surgeons, although you can also suggest people outside of the field. But they should be people that you do not have a close working relationship with, that they're not a close collaborator, because these need to be fairly objective. So you're looking for people usually of either associate or full professor rank at usually similar peer institutions, and they will be basically given your CV and your personal statement or executive summary, and should be able to comment on whether they, basically whether they think that you would be of that appropriate rank at their institution. So it's, I think, important to think of a variety of people you think that are going to advocate for you. They don't necessarily have to be people you know, but maybe people who know of you. Some institutions will specifically ask for a list of suggested people. Some institutions, from what I've heard, actually want you to be involved in contacting them, and some are really more, I guess, maybe more shrouded, I could say, in the process, and they will reach out to people directly.
Anyone else have any comments about letters of rec that they found? Okay. I think the last topic we're going to touch on tonight is what you call either this personal statement or statement of intent or executive summary, which Inez had alluded to just a minute ago. And that is something that most universities will want the person going up for a promotion to create, basically to give a summary of themselves or of the work they've done in all those years that, since the last promotion. Nupur, can you comment on the importance of that statement of intent and what it should entail?
Absolutely. So I actually thought this was probably the most challenging piece of the packet to put together. You're required to really write about yourself in a way that's very self-promoting, which I think maybe as women and maybe as surgeons who kind of just keep our heads down and try to get it done, it's somewhat challenging to be a self-promoter. And I think it's also hard to not just recapitulate your CV. So I feel like this is something you need to start early. You need to edit brutally, and you need to get feedback from those around you in what to put into it. And so to give you an example, I started mine about 6 months before it was due, and it ended up being about like 6 pages when I started, and it was a bit rambling. And then I kind of had a first pass at it. I had some peers look at it and people in different departments, because your promotion and tenure team is not going to be all plastic surgeons. They're usually going to be other people at the medical school level. And so I made a dermatologist look at it, the chair of pediatrics, and then another friend who's an ENT colleague. And really the feedback they gave me was that you're not selling a story about yourself. This sort of looks like a recapitulation of your CV. And so the advice I got that I thought was very helpful was pick 4 things in your CV that you want to highlight. And that can be either like this theme of education that runs through your CV, or this theme of leadership and leadership development of female surgeons that runs through your CV. And then usually, since most of us are on the clinical educator track, pick one clinical area you want to highlight. And for me, I was able to, the same way that Kristen was able to build a transgender surgery program, I was able to build a pediatric microsurgery program out of like very little resources. And so I started with that and was able to provide metrics and then show that like I'm getting a reputation regionally and then nationally to provide presentations on this topic. And then I kind of went into the second segment of look at the leadership development I've done on a regional level, on a national level, and now like kind of winning awards for it at the medical school and nationally. And so that was actually really helpful advice. And so I would encourage you to start early and then highlight 2 to 4 things that you think are really important. And ultimately, you also don't want this application to be too long. And so by the time I got down to the final version, it was only 3 pages. And I was a little worried. I was like, am I not telling my story well enough in 3 pages? But 3 pages is plenty. They are not going to read 6 single-spaced pages. They're going to read about 2 to 3.5 maybe. And so I thought that was actually the most challenging part, but also the most important part to sell yourself. So very similar to like our residents and medical students who are working on that personal statement for plastic surgery residency or for their fellowship. This is your one chance to write and tell them about yourself. And unlike residency and medical school, you don't actually get an in-person interview to sell yourself. You have to sell yourself with this document.
Great. Does anyone else have anything to add to that?
I do. I think it's a little different for each institution, and I think it's pretty much the same what they're looking for. However, at Duke they call it an IDS, or intellectual development statement, and it's literally the same thing, except it has pretty much like a table format in the executive summary, which is narrative. So it's both. So it's about, usually it can range from anywhere from 15 to 20 pages because of these charts that summarize your literally every year you've been at Duke. So for mine was 5 years, and I had to summarize literally the same thing from almost your CV with clinical teaching, lectures, seminars, laboratories, mentoring, research. And every year we had to do that. And then additional, they're actually a little bit more specific for us, where they actually have they want sections for your narrative. So the first one is the history and education, brief biographical history, clinical activities, teaching, and then it goes into a little bit more depth about leadership, institutional service, grant support, and then scholarship. So it breaks it down for us, but they still want a narrative. And I agree with Nupur, it's very difficult to promote yourself and to make it sound that, you know, you're not being, you know, critical about what you do. And you really do have to put it out there. I think she was also very, a good point was you really, it'd be great to get somebody who's already done this. And I didn't have anybody initially to kind of go over this with me when I first started. You know, Ash Patel helped me along the way and gave me his to take a look at to see what it looks like, you know, when it's fully written, just to understand what the format is. And then I had him, you know, look at mine, and had a couple people look at mine as well. And I think one of the key things is when you first start this, grab a mentor, you know, grab somebody who's been through it, and they can kind of guide you along the way. It will make it so much easier.
Annette?
Yeah, I cannot emphasize the concept of telling a story. I think it is so key that you want to tell an amazing story about why you are where you're, like how you've gotten to where you are. And so it is important to be brief. We were very strict that you had to have it 2 to 3 pages, no more. And sometimes there's like we had to actually like discuss like 4, like out of our CV, like four papers that were kind of represented our research interests, and go into them. And then you kind of tell the rest of your story of your other clinical things and stuff like that. For me, like one of my points was I went back to, and it sounds silly, I went back to school, but I went back to school to get a master's degree in education. And so like that became a very overarching theme, part of my story. And I think it is important to see if you can get copies of people who have been successfully promoted. Like our faculty of affairs admin was able to provide that as an example. And then when you have someone read it, I would recommend having someone read it who's like one of your biggest fans, because they're going to tell you like how much more you should make something positive, how much more to sell it. So I had, my husband's also in medicine, so he read mine, you know, have like, you know, like mentors and advocates of yours read it. So that way, you know, because I think it's going to be inherent to all of us to undersell ourselves. And you really want to make it as promotional as possible.
Abby, did you have a comment?
No, I agree with all that. I think it's a very unnatural process, sort of writing a letter, selling yourself, and it's not something that we're used to. And so I also had made multiple edits and had multiple people read my letters, read the letter and make suggestions, and to really make it, you know, sell yourself to the university. So as many eyes as you can have looking at it, as many people who may share their letters with you from their promotion. I think the gist is the same between different institutions with different, even though they have different specifics.
Great. So to wrap up the session, I wanted everyone to maybe comment on, you can comment on both areas or choose one, basically how national involvement, networking, which goes along with that sometimes, as well as how mentorship and sponsorship all contribute to this promotion process. And if you have any tips on how to make sure that you maximize those things as you're going through this.
I can start. I think part of the process, what I didn't realize what was so important, it was the networking part of academia. I've been in both private practice and academics. Honestly, I didn't think I would be in academics this long. So that's probably why I didn't, you know, pay too much attention to those folders that I initially got in orientation. But, you know, I think once you start the process and realize that, you know, part of this, who you meet at these meetings, and seeing these amazing women go through the promotions ahead of you and go up through leadership ahead of you, it's like inspiring and makes it realize that, wow, I can do this too. I think I had a little bit of I did have a lot of imposter syndrome coming in to academia, not realizing that I could go into these leaderships and promotion, you know, just as well as some of the other men could. But it's encouraging. And when you go to these national and regional societies, I encourage everyone to go to the meetings for networking with the women, you know, plastic surgery. And I think it's, once you get to know everybody, I think it does help with having that collaboration and asking questions and seeing, you know, what they can do to help you. And, you know, because I didn't have I didn't have any women plastic surgeons and had actually at Duke. I was pretty much the only one for a long time until I got a couple other females. So it's a rare thing to actually get a woman in plastic surgery to actually help mentor you. But throughout the national and regional societies, there's plenty. So I think that's one of the key things. Also makes it a little easier to pick names for writing letters to write for letter recommendations. So I think that's just one of the things I would recommend.
Abby, you want to go next?
Yeah, I don't have a lot to add. I completely agree with that. And yeah, not much to add to that one.
Okay. Inez?
Yeah, I mean, I think getting involved in these, whether it's regional or national organizations for plastic surgeons, I think is a very valuable experience. It obviously expands your social network beyond your immediate institution and where you trained at. And you never know, I think to Nipur's comment about kind of like how much can you hold on your plate at once. And, you know, we do have a tendency to say yes, but I can tell you that there are things that I've actively pursued and have gone well or not gone well. And that's been nice. But there have been things that like I never really thought were going to go anywhere. And then all of a sudden, like someone said, hey, do you want to join this or do this? And then it kind of opens up this whole other avenue of experiences that, you know, for me as someone who kind of I'm in the hand world, but I'm also in this like a little bit in the plastic surgery world. Like, you know, like some of my involvement with ASPS is kind of, you know, blossomed into certain relationships that I never really kind of anticipated and wasn't really planning for. And so I think that, you know, kind of staying engaged, even if you're not sure where it's going to take you, I think is important. And it just, fosters connections that when it's time to ask letters, then your name is more present in more people's minds. In terms of your comment about mentorship, I definitely have evolved my thought of mentorship in terms of like how you maintain it. And I used to think like a lot of traditional mentorship roles were like you had this one person or a couple of people who kind of guided you through your entire career. And I think that mentorship the concept of it has, at least for me, changed, where you really you can kind of seek multiple mentors for very specific reasons. And I think that for the promotions process, finding either within your institution or outside your institution, people to kind of check in with on a regular basis, to look over your CV and say, hey, am I getting where I need to get to? What do you recommend? What are my other things that I'm like missing? And just to have that feedback, because I think that it's very easy to kind of just plug along, and then 5 years have passed and you're like, wait a second, I need to start getting all this together. So I think kind of having someone to check in with regularly and look at your CV and give you that feedback, makes you kind of keep track of it yourself, but then also kind of helps guide you so you're not, hopefully caught a little bit off guard when it's time to get to that next step.
Nipur, do you have anything to add?
I don't think I have anything that's going to be as eloquent as what she's just put out there. So I think at the end of the day, I'm just very excited to be part of this group of female surgeons. And, when I look at these faces on this panel and the people on this committee, actually, these are also like my greatest peers and mentors in plastic surgery. And I love that this group of female plastic surgeons is very agile and very facile. And I think they're just doing a lot of great things. A lot of organizations, which is really incredible to see.
Great. Yes, I echo that. This has been an amazing panel. I'm super excited that this is going to be added to the website for a resource, because I think this is going to be a great resource for years and years to come for people to look at when they're wondering about promotion. Hopefully we at least got the word across that they really need to take this by the horns and be their own champion for it, because that's what's most important, I think, overall, is just to understand what you need to do for yourself in this whole process. So if no one else has any other last minute comments, I think we're done for the evening. Thank you all for spending your time with me for an hour.
Okay, thank you, Nicole.
Thank you. This was great.
Thanks, Nicole. Good night, everyone.
Bye.
Good night,
Bye.
everyone.
Thank you.
I think we had one participant, so there's that.
Yes.
Maybe I'll just thought they had to register to watch it later.
Oh, yeah, maybe, yeah.
That's
Didn't
possible.
Find it that way.
I can text Wen and ask her what she thought.
We had we heard she was our captive audience of one.
Yeah.
Thanks, Shayla.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jill.
Bye.
Bye.